I'm Katherine Thompson. This is my 9-month-old baby girl, Eloise, and we'll be interviewing my dad, Merle Thompson, today about some of his memories and his life experiences. Where did you grow up? And talk about your family growing up.
I grew up in New Harbor, was born Damariscotta, lived in New Harbor, as did my dad and his father. I was born in 1954 in Damariscotta. I'm the third child, I'm the youngest of three boys. And my folks ran the Thompson House restaurant and cottages as Dad built them growing up. I lobstered with my brother when I was 8. And
Who was that, Craig? Right?
Craig. And I had my own skiff when I was 10 or 11. I had a little skiff with a 5 horsepower, 5.5, I think.
How many troughs did you have?
I probably started with 20 or 25, but I had 100 a couple of years after that. I was fishing 100 traps, hauling by hand.
Those were the wooden ones, right?
Wooden traps. I built them myself. First ones we bought, and after that I built them.
Were the ones you started out with your grandfather's?
No, I don't know. Dad got them from somewhere. I don't remember where he got the first ones, but I learned to knit the heads, and I knit my own heads after a couple of years.
You used your grandfather's buoys, didn't you?
Used some of my grandfather's buoys, the old wooden ones. They're not allowed anymore. The ones that he'd made.
Were they white with a light blue stripe?
They were white with a blue stripe. Yeah. Craig had that color, and then I had it. And it was a great childhood growing up. We were in Back Cove and New Harbor in skiffs all the time. We were out on the islands. We took lobsters out and cooked them in an old bucket on Little Island and some of the other islands. And there was a group of us, kids that lobstered. They called us the mosquito fleet.
Because you'd buzz around?
Well, because we were kids in boats, buzzing around, I guess, yeah. And the old guys looked out for us. Albert and Malcolm and Addie and Tai and Punk.
Those were all the Back Cove?
Back Cove lobstermen, biscuits. Don Benner was in Back Cove. He had a dragger. He had a little dragger mount moored there. It was a great...
Do you have any stories about getting in trouble or
I won't tell you about getting in trouble, but I'll tell you that when we were in trouble, my folks generally knew it before I got home. Fishermen kept pretty good eye on us and kept pretty good in touch with my dad. So we didn't get away with too much. We did have apple fights, which turned into muscle fights until I got one. Somebody winged one and it hit me in the side of the head and broke and hurt quite bad. I mean, I wasn't hurt, but it didn't feel very good. Once my folks found out about that, they put a stop to the muscle fights. But we lobstered summers, and when I got a little older, I lobstered and I worked for El Matar, carpentering. And I learned some carpenter skills that worked for me when I started building my own house over on Rogers Road, and when I built 2 cottages for Dad, 20 and 21. I think he wanted to keep me out of trouble. I was 19. I was just out of high school, and that was
around what, 73?
something like that, 74. And then I went to work with Bill Dawson on the Kathy and Mike shrimping, and worked a winter or so for him, and then I worked dragging with Jimmy Fawcett, and Jimmy and I went with Lee pogying. I got a call from Terry.
Lee Riley.
Yeah, I got a call from Lee's son, Terry. They were in Gloucester, and they needed a hand. I don't know if somebody quit or they found that it was more work, but they needed a hand. And I went down to Gloucester, and the Ugly Duck was the seine boat. You probably remember that, Ross. It was a Nova Scotia boat that was 38 feet and almost 18 feet wide. It was almost square. And they didn't have any more bunks. We were on the Nyanza, which was an old wheelhouse aft, an old eastern rig that Manville Davis actually had built. And they didn't have any more bunks in that, so I stayed aboard the Pogie boat.
Oh,
Had bunks.
that smelled good, I bet.
Well, we had I think the seine was 1,200 feet long, and it would come back with pogies meshed in it, which would rot quickly, and the flies would get to it overnight. So the first night I was there, I put up one of those strips, and I caught 200 flies. Didn't make a dent in them. I learned to cover up good. And I tended the bags on the stern. The pogies like to push the twine around, and they'll make bags and get in under the boat. So I tended the bags, and then, this may not be appetizing, I had a full beard at the time, and when the seine would go out, the maggots would be in the air everywhere. And I didn't have a beard very long. And it was one of my jobs was to shovel up the maggots off the deck. I'd have almost 5-gallon bucket full after we
That's good chicken food.
set the seine. Well, it went overboard. Anyway, where are we? What else?
What did you do after high school?
I went to college for a year. I went to Orono. And I had enjoyed math in high school, so I had signed up for some math courses, and I realized they were awfully dry. So I changed them all to philosophy courses, which my advisor really didn't like. I took what philosophy courses they had, and then I took a year off. And I'm still taking a year off.
Did they encourage you to go to school? I can't imagine.
Yeah,
you
they really
doing
wanted me to
on
go
your
to
own.
school.
Yeah.
My folks were
Probably grandma.
heartbroken when I didn't go back.
Yeah.
I went fishing. I wanted to go fishing, so I did that. I went with, I think I went back with O. Fawcett for a little while, and then I went with Terry. And I'd been pogying with Lee, and I was with him when he bought the High Chaparral. I went south with him, went to Louisiana, Bile Battery, and we bought the High Chaparral. Lee did, and I rode back with him, me and Roger Shaw, and I don't remember who else. I think it might have just been the three of us.
Where did you buy it? Where did you buy it?
In Louisiana, in Bile Battery, which is just a little gunk hole down in the bayous of Louisiana. It's a place where they built those boats. And I fished, I went dragging on it with Terry in the winter, and Terry got seasick. He didn't really like going, and the High Chaparral was built to go offshore. So we didn't go very much. Terry would get us, he'd assemble us every morning, we'd hang around, shoot the shit, and then he'd say, well, I think it might blow, we'll go home. And I found that irritating. I was ambitious. I wanted to go fishing. So I looked for a boat to buy. My dad was willing to back me, thinking I knew a lot more than I did. And Lee decided to sell the High Chaparral, so I bought that. And I went fishing, and I went with the gear that Terry had, which was a way too small a net and doors for that boat. And most of the fishing ground that I had been on with Terry, the fish were caught up by the times I got the boat. So I had to expand my territory.
Where was that?
Off 20, 30 miles. We didn't go very far. But I started roaming the Gulf of Maine, and we made some ventures to George's Banks, and eventually I learned the territory and bought bigger gear and bigger doors, and we did pretty well. At first it was a challenge, but we did pretty well.
You made some doors, didn't you?
I designed and built my own doors at one time, which drove my crew crazy because there was a lot of trial and error. And I never really perfected them for the High Chaparral. I did use them on the other boat that I bought, and they were great. They were perfect for that boat, but they didn't really work on the High Chaparral. There was an awful lot of physics and hydraulics that I didn't really know about. I learned a lot of math doing that, but there was too much trial and error to make a living and keep fooling with it.
At what point did you work on tugboats on the river?
I decided that I would go south. I must have been 19 or 20, one of those winters when I was pogying. Yeah, I was pogying with Lee. And I went down to Louisiana, and I hitchhiked around looking for work, and I talked to people at a company called Kelly Candies. I believe they were out of Des Allemands, Louisiana. And when they interviewed me, they asked me they asked me what my experience was on tugs, which was nothing, but that I'd worked on boats. And they asked me where I was from, and I said Maine, and they said, "You're hired." Because their experience with people from Maine was that they were good workers. So I was on the Kelly Candies. We fished out, we went out of Homer, I think was what the official port was, but we didn't come into port. I took a crew boat out to it. It was 135 feet long. I think it was 17 feet, and it was almost all underwater. It drew an awful lot of water. It was a big boat with an awful lot of power. And we tended a derrick barge that built the oil rigs.
Oh.
So we moored, either tied up alongside the barge, or we ran a bow line off the oil rig and the derrick barge that it was building. So I got to watch that process.
So this is Gulf of Mexico?
Gulf of Mexico, yeah. We were 100 miles at sea. And I did that for a winter and worked with the Cajuns, lived with them when I came home, lived in New Orleans for a period of time. I could come and go as I wanted. I'd work 2, 3 weeks or 4 weeks, and then I'd get off for a week till my money ran out. I was young, and I was spending money as fast as I made it. But yeah, that was a good experience, and they were nice people. The Cajun people were very nice to me. The captain of that boat, I came and went from that boat, and the captain of that boat had a big family. He had, I don't know, 16 or 17 kids.
Wow.
And he brought me home at one point, and I stayed with him for a while. Nice people. What else?
So let's see, you were doing High Chaparral. Oh, tell us about meeting Mommy.
But what?
Meeting Mommy.
I was fishing, I had long hair, long scraggly hair and a scraggly beard. And I had an old piece of junk station wagon that Bruce Hanna had, and it was off in his field. It needed a transmission. So I bought it for, I think, $20 and got some friends to bring it home, and I put got a transmission out of a junkyard and put it in it over at the garage. The heater didn't work and the windows didn't roll all the way up, and there were several other things, but I met Karen. They were staying in the rec room, she and her parents, and I was actually living with somebody else down in Round Pond.
What year was that?
Oh God, I was 23, I think, because she was walking down the road, and I saw this beautiful young woman walking, and I turned around and went back and said, "Can I give you a ride somewhere?" And she said she was going to coast, going to shore. So I took her to Yellowhead, and we stopped and we talked and visited, and we dated that night, and I was in love. I stopped living with the woman that I had been with and started dating Karen, and she went to school 3 days after. She went to college 3 days after we met.
Oh, she was just starting at Mount Holyoke?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So I started making trips out to visit her, and after I bought the High Chaparral the next year, I was 24, which is way too young for that much responsibility. The learning curve was steep, and when I'd get in, I would go out to see her. One time I brought a bucket of shrimp out. We'd been shrimping. I don't know if it was shrimping on my boat or one of the others, but anyway, these girls were from India and Pakistan, and they were rich kids from all over the world. And I asked them if they liked shrimp, and they said, yeah, they all like shrimp. So I brought this bucket of shrimp in, and they all looked at it like, what the hell is that? They'd never seen a real shrimp in the shell. So I showed them how to pick them, and they went at it. It was fun. But I spent a lot of time driving back and forth to Massachusetts. And when I had a long trip and was tired, I had friends that drove me out a couple times. But we were together from then on. Well, she tried to break up with me a couple times when it got frustrating.
The boat, right?
Yeah, boat stuff. One time I had needed transmission work on the High Chaparral, and we went to Gloucester, and Concord wasn't far from Gloucester, and she came to visit me, but I'd taken the boat down thinking they would fix the transmission in the boat, and they said, no, we got to have it back in the shop. So this transmission weighed more than a car. I mean, it was a big piece of steel. It was that big and that long and that deep. And so we had to cut the after end of the engine room, and we had to cut the fish hole apart, and we had to jack it out through the fish hole. Anyway, we had a lot of work to do, and I didn't have time to visit with her. She was awful mad. She was mad.
And Russ, by the way, that's the High Chaparral.
That's my boat up there.
What was it, 80 feet?
86 feet.
The scariest thing you've ever faced? You can pass on these questions too if you don't want to answer.
No, I'll tell you, but it might make me cry. Couple of things, I guess, but I think the scariest experience I had was when you rode home from Loud's Island.
Oh, God.
It's a little hard for me to tell, but Katherine and a friend stayed overnight on Loud's Island, and they were in a pea pod. and they rowed home. And instead of rowing straight home to Round Pond, which is where they're based out of, Katherine decided they'd row to New Harbor. And there's some pretty rough spots.
It was November.
It was windy. It was November. There's some pretty rough spots there, and
storm.
and they didn't come in. They didn't come into Round Pond. We went to Round Pond, and Robert Ball was there, and he asked if we wanted to take a ride and look for him. We did. So we made the whole route.
We called in. I think we called in on Channel 16.
Yeah, we didn't find that out.
Robert heard us. Well, and then we lost radio. I think we lost battery in our
Yeah,
radio or
something happened. We went looking for you, and time we got to New Harbor, we hadn't found you, and Robert said, "I think it's time to call the Coast Guard."
Yeah.
And I said, "Yeah." And about that time, Mike Riley was on the radio, said, "You looking for Katherine?" And we said, "Yeah," and he said, "She just put into Back Cove."
We got around the corner there. We got around the corner of Louds, and then we were going with the wind, which is what I had thought. I
Yeah,
wasn't thinking of the most exposed areas we could be in a rowboat in November.
yeah.
And once we were going with the wind, it was smooth sailing. We breezed right into the cove.
I think that's about the scariest I've been. I've had times on the High Chaparral where, I mean, it was a big boat. We were out in everything, and we were out in some awful big storms. But I can remember a couple times when it came on quick, and we had the gear out, and I didn't want to put the crew on deck,
Yeah.
and so we kept towing, and we towed way too long. But I kept towing, hoping it would clear up, let go a little bit, and it didn't. It kept coming. So we hauled back, and you're always stern to it, hauling back. And the crew was on deck, and I was in the wheelhouse, and I was looking down at the stern, and the next wave was up here, and there's the crew, and the next wave looming over them, and that was a pretty scary time. But I mean, the boat rode up on the waves, and it was all right. But it's a little frightening looking at the crew with the wave looming over them like that.
That was what I expected your answer to be. I didn't expect it to.
Let's move on to something more fun.
Something that no one knows about you.
Something that no one knows about me?
Yeah.
I don't know that there's anything that no one knows about
Something
me.
that very few people know about.
I guess that would be something I don't want to talk about. and I'll brush those things. One is I'm a recovering person. I haven't had a drink or another substance for over 35 years, which, that's sort of an anonymous thing, but
But you've helped a lot of people through it too.
Yep,
And that's,
yep. I work with people who want to get sober and clean, and I've worked with a lot of people, and we help each other. And I guess the other thing that I really don't talk about is the north wind. I lost 3 men on my boats. One on the High Chaparral, and 2 went down with the north wind, all when I was on trips off, all in the same family. And Karen and I took the news that the sons weren't coming home to this family twice. And that's not in my scrapbook of fishing. And I don't talk about it very much, the north wind in general. And I've always stayed out of the limelight just because that family lost 3 sons, and I just don't feel right being in the public eye. You know, I've had a good life, and her sons didn't, and it just doesn't feel right to me to be out. I mean, I'm a public person, ran a public business, but to be in the newspaper, to be on TV, to be in what could be their face, it just doesn't feel good to me. So I have stayed low profile, which isn't a bad thing anyway.
Tell us about getting out of fishing, if you want to.
I ran the High Chaparral, I ran it ashore. I had tinted windows, really expensive, nice tinted windows. And we had been shrimping. And I'd been up for 36 hours. I'd been at the wheel for 36 hours. And I laid down on the way home. The boys let me sleep, and I woke. They got me up right at the mouth of South Bristol. And I changed the radar, and I tuned it in too small so that everything looked bigger than it was. And I went around the wrong buoy. So I steamed onto the shore, and I didn't see that I was going ashore because the wind had tinted windows. As soon as I looked out the door, I thought, I could see, oh my God, I should have seen this. But anyway, while that was being fixed, Arthur, my engineer, oversaw the refit, and I went with O'Hara's. Ran the Alliance to the tail of the Grand Banks. And I ran their boats for a couple of years. And Arthur took the High Chaparral when it was done. But when I got off O'Hara boats, after a couple of years, Katherine was little, and I was gone a lot. I was on 2-week trips, and I wanted to be home more, and Karen wanted me home. So I bought a 55 little boat to me, 55-footer, and fished that. And I thought I was going to be home more and working less, but if you're fishing, you're working all the time. There's just no working less. So it wasn't working well for us, and I had got in recovery, and the fish in the Gulf of Maine were at a low point. They'd been depleted. So it was hard scratching. We were towing the rag around for a little handful of nothing. And I hated it at that point. So I got the boys to take my boat out while I tried to figure out what the hell I was going to do, because this boy, Darren, had said that he wanted, if I wanted somebody to take his boat, he'd like to do it. He changed his mind at the last minute, and I asked him if he'd just take it for a trip or two while I figured it out. And that's when they didn't come home. The boat was lost, and Darren and his brother were lost. So that's how I got out of fishing. I stayed home for a while to try to figure out how to be home, to be with my family, because I hadn't done much of that. That's my granddaughter, by the way. She's a darling.
Eloise.
And I cut wood with Earl Cooper for a while, and I just hated it. It's the only thing I've ever done that I got worse at the more I did it. Running with a chainsaw, trying to keep up with a skidder, it's just a horrible business. And I figured out that if I was going to starve to death for a living, I wasn't going to kill myself doing it. So I quit. And I was home trying to figure out what I was going to do next, and my microwave oven went to hell. And this guy came to fix it, and he was all crippled up with rheumatoid arthritis, Jim Myers. And I said, don't you need someone to come along and help you? And he said, no, he didn't need any help. And he didn't really want any help, but I could come along, take over the business, because he had to get out of it. He couldn't do it anymore. So I did that. I went with him and learned the business, which I never had dreamed I had any aptitude for. Had never had anything to do with electrical things. And I learned the business from him and bought him out. And we went for 6 months basically without an income, with almost nothing. Times it was lean. Not that we didn't have people willing to help us. Reggie carried us for a while, and but then I repaired appliances for 10 years, and that turned into a good business.
Was it 10 years? Wow.
Yeah, Jim had let it go because he couldn't do a lot of it. He couldn't get on his knees, and there was a lot he couldn't do. So I built it back up, got contracts with the companies to do warranty work, and so that was how I got out of fishing. I did that for 10 years, and then my folks, came time for them to retire, and Mother wanted to retire. Dad didn't. Mother, Dad was starting to double book things, and things were getting a little messy.
Grandpa was not 84, is that right?
He was 80 when we took over.
80, okay.
And
that was 2000?
yeah. So Karen and I took that over, and they said, we went into Rob Gregory's office, and they didn't have anything spelled out. And Rob said, so how are you going to do this with the boys, Dan? And Dad said, well, we're just going to let them figure it out. And I said, no, we're not doing that. Not going to be in business with my brothers and sister-in-laws. Not doing that. I got a good business. I'll walk away. And so Rob made some suggestions, and what they came up with is Karen and I would get the business, and Craig and Guy would get the money, because they had stocks and bonds. They had wealth above and beyond the cottage business. And so we did that. We took over the business, and we ran it for 21 years. And it was a good business for us. We were able to build this home, sold our home on Rogers Road, which I had started to build when I was 19, and finished up. Well, we lived in it, and bare 2x4s for a number of years, and insulation, and we got somebody, when fishing got good for me, we got somebody, one guy, Kenton Carter, came and worked on it and finished it up. But then Karen never liked living down there. It was too remote for her. She wanted to be in the middle. She really wanted to live in Damariscotta, but I stalled that off. We did buy land up there, but I stalled until we took over the cottage business, and she figured out that we had to be down here. So yeah. Dad had this piece of land, which he'd been trying to give us for years, and I insisted on buying it. So we bought it with this from him and built here. Sold the property in Damariscotta. But anyway, you asked how I got out of fishing. That was the long version of that.
Here, can you tell us one of Grandpa's stories? I like the bungee one.
Dad liked to tell about Fred Brackett. Down at the head of the harbor where the conference, still call it the conference center. It's a Contented Soul now, is the restaurant. There was an old farmhouse with three little cabins and a dock down on the edge, and Fred Brackett lived there. We called him Bungie. And Bungie was an old guy, and he lobstered out of a dory. He rowed, and they said Bungie had 2 pot boys, one on each end. And I don't know how many traps he had, but he'd row all the way around. he'd haul all the way around till he got to the other end. And they said Bungie had, years ago, this from here down was all rocks. It was all ledgy and rocks, and that's what they called Bungie's pasture. And they said Bungie had a two-headed cow. And they said the cow needed to have two heads to get a living out of Bungie's pasture.
When was that?
Oh,
30s, 40s?
long time ago. Yeah. I don't know how much of that's true, but Dad loved to tell that.
What would you like to be remembered for?
I've thought about that question. I think I'd like to be remembered for my family. I think that getting in recovery and learning to be a father and a husband and learning to live a good, solid life is the best that I have. And if I can be remembered for being a good father and husband and grandfather, that's enough for me. That's good enough. I've had a really good life. I mean, I've had a very eventful life. I've done a lot of things. You know, I did all the welding on the boats. I've learned to be an appliance repair person. I was pretty successful in fishing. We loaded the boats a lot. We used to come in with 100,000 pounds a trip from the Grand Banks. Had a lot of 50, 60, 70,000 trips in the High Chaparral. There isn't fish like that anymore. That fishing is done. But, you know, I'm grateful for the life that I have and for the family that I have. And the meetings I go to, I know a lot of people whose families want nothing to do with them, you know, and who have burned bridges and hurt people. And I'm just grateful that this life that I have is still so good. I'm 70 years old and I go skiing in the winter. And I get to be a grandfather. I get to help you guys. I get to help Charlie when he, less and less, because not much stumps Charlie anymore, but when he gets stumped by something, I get to help. You know, and I'm as busy as I want to be. So I think I don't need to go down in history very far. If I can be remembered by the people that are living as a good father and a good husband, I'm good with that.
Well, I'll remember you that way.
Thank you.
If you could give a piece of advice to the next generation, what would it be?
Don't hide from your feelings. I used drugs and alcohol to push my feelings aside and to bull through everything, which is, I mean, I was taught to do that. That's what we did on the boats that I worked on. We worked hard, we worked really hard, and we came in and we drank. And I mean, I put in a lot of 36 and 48 and even longer days round the clock. And when I got home, I jumped into a bottle, you know, that was how I unwound. That was how I dealt with the stress. And what I've learned in recovery is to feel my feelings and to give other people room to do as well. You know, life is too short to ignore things. I don't know if that makes any sense or not. But
You've learned a lot about how to take care of yourself too. Listening to your body and eating healthy. And
Yep. Yep, I have. I see a naturopath regularly. I eat well, my version of eating well. I like meat, so I eat meat, but I don't eat a ton of it. Yeah, I exercise, I ski, I walk every morning. I walk down around the footbridge and back cove and around the loop and back up. I'm up at 3:30 most mornings, and I do an hour meditation. And then I take Zipper out for his walk, and I'm out at 5:30, 5:15, doing my walk. And then I come in and sit at my desk and do whatever needs to be done there. That's been my routine for a long time, and I like that.
How do you like retirement?
I love being retired. Best job I've ever had.
You're keeping pretty busy stuff.
Best job I've ever had.
He was fixing a washer at one of our cottages yesterday. So.
Yeah. And
Still doing appliance repair.
And I run the tractor. I fixed up the roads, and I'm going to cut up that apple tree that's in the field one of these days. But I work mornings when I've got something to do.
Plenty to do.
Yeah, I work mornings until usually 11:30. Then I come home and have lunch and take a nap. Then Karen and I take Zipper out, and then I rest. I like that schedule.
And you have another job, the stand.
Oh yeah, I work at the farm stand. I help out at High Hopes Farm Stand one afternoon, one day a week, either morning or afternoon, whatever she wants me. And that gives me a chance to see people and talk to people. I'm social. I like being around people and getting to talk to them. A lot of people come in and visit with me. I like that.
Our guest asked what Merle's doing, and I pointed up the road to the stand. They can go visit him there.
And I bring fresh vegetables home.
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah.
Oh, and do you want to, the last thing I thought of was, do you want to talk about the footbridge? I don't know if that's...
I gave you a DVD with some pictures of my family, and the footbridge pictures are in there. The footbridge in Back Cove, how much do you want to hear?
Oh, I don't know. I just thought you would tell about the recent rebuild and when the last...
The footbridge in Back Cove, typically, the ice in the back end of it would build up in the winter. Sometimes it would get a foot or a foot and a half thick. And it would break up as the tide would go out. It would break up on the sides, and when there was a storm, it would ebb back and forth, and those ice cakes would hit the footbridge. And we had icebreakers, but the icebreakers would get old and break, and then the ice cakes would wipe out a portion of the footbridge or all of it. We rebuilt the whole thing in 1993. Dad foot the bill, and I headed up the crew, and the Back Covers and the Pendletons, a bunch of us rebuilt it. This time, the danger came from the other side. The ice doesn't get more than 3-4 inches thick now in the pound, which is still quite a lot if you've got a 20-foot ice cake, but it's open every few weeks now. Our climate is very different than it was when I was a kid. Anyway, the storm in January, it was the surge coming down the harbor that took it out this time. Astronomical high tide and 70-mile-an-hour winds and a storm surge on top of that. So 30 feet of it were missing, and we rebuilt it. We assembled a crew of people that were interested, mostly people that have moved here, nice people who love this town and use the footbridge. I headed up the crew. I bought the material and cut out the parts and pieces as needed. And this time, I drilled holes in the rocks, and I welded up some pins to put in the holes, and we chained it down. We ran chains to keep it there this time, hopefully, and quite a few of them, and hopefully, well, I'm 70. I'd like to not be the one to rebuild it again.
Yeah.
But we have had pieces of it gone the last, a number of times, and it always happened in January. Usually just before I was going on vacation. So I'd have Don Ozier would go down with me, and we'd climb around on seaweed-covered rocks, and it was usually blowing 20 to 30 northwest down over that ice, and 15 degrees. And anyway, we'd go down and shore it up until we could get the stuff together or get somebody to rebuild it. New Harbor Marine rebuilt it for me one time. Put a couple of sets of stanchions in. But we did that this spring. This spring we rebuilt 30 feet. It's 100 feet long, so we rebuilt roughly a third of it.
And one difference was we crowdsourced the funds this time. So
GoFundMe paid for it.
Community effort to rebuild it.
Yep.
One question I liked is, what gives you hope?
My family. Seeing my family thrive and be such a happy, loving family, and take over the family business and do so well with it, even though it may not be viable, parts of it, for the future. But that's what gives me hope. I don't know, honestly, if I have a great deal of hope for the future of the human race, but I think for the next generation or two, I think my family appears to be on a good track. Katherine's a great parent. Charlie is a great father, and my grandchildren are growing up happy and strong and loved. And I think that's as good as I could ask for.